Hey writers, you're listening to the Kobo Writing Life podcast, where we bring you insights and inspiration for growing your self-publishing business. We're your hosts. I'm Laura, Kobo Writing Life's Author Engagement Manager.
And I'm Rachel, Kobo Writing Life's other Author Engagement Manager.
Today we spoke to author Alison Cochrun. Alison is a former high school English teacher and a current writer of queer love stories, including The Charm Offensive and Kiss Her Once for Me, which won the Lambda Literary Award for Best LGBTQ Romance. She lives outside of Portland, Oregon, with 2 giant dogs, her small wife, and too many books. You can find her online at AlisonCochrun.com or on Instagram as Alison Cochrun.
We had such a fun conversation with Alison talking about her writing career, her transition from high school English teacher to full-time author, and her upcoming novel, Here We Go Again. We talked to her about where she got the idea from for this upcoming book, which is a lesbian road trip novel about death. We talked about writing in dual POV and how she created 2 distinctly different queer female characters and how she balanced the 2 tones in this rom-com, which is both deeply funny and just devastatingly sad. It was a really interesting conversation. I think there's a lot to learn from Alison, and we hope you enjoy. We are joined today by author Alison Cochrun. Alison, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yay, thank you so much for having me.
Laura and I are so excited to talk to you and to talk to you about your upcoming book, Here We Go Again, which we both finished recently and loved. But before we get into that, can you kind of kick us off by telling our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, of course. So my name is Alison, and I live just outside of Portland, Oregon. I have been writing queer romance for, I guess, like 4 years now. So Here We Go Again is my 3rd book. My debut, The Charm Offensive, came out in 2021. And then my 2nd book, Kiss Her Once for Me, came out around the holidays in 22. I used to be a high school English teacher, and now by some miracle, I get to do this job full time, and it's amazing.
Well, I would actually love to hear a little bit about the transition from full-time English teacher to full-time author, kind of what spurred that decision and how the transition went for you.
Yeah. So I taught high school English for 11 years. And I mean, like teaching English, I think all teaching jobs, but like it's a big time commitment. I spent a lot of my 20s just working. And so and I loved teaching, and I loved my students, and I loved that part of my life. But I always was writing kind of like on the side, on breaks, but nothing that seemed like it would go anywhere. It was just like a thing that I did for myself in the summer. And then I had the idea for my first book, The Charm Offensive. It came to me like at the end of a school year, so June 2019. And I just like have never been that kind of excited about an idea. And so it came out of me, the first draft, really quickly. And I was kind of like, oh, wait, like, well, maybe this could be, could be something. I should put some effort into it and see where it goes. And so when I ended up selling the book in June of 2020, so just like right in the thick of quarantine, it was good times, kind of waffled a little bit about, because I did not, make the kind of money that would allow me to quit my job. But I also, as I was kind of getting ready to publish like a queer adult romance, and it was pandemic and I was working all the time, just kind of playing around with the idea of like taking a risk and seeing what would happen if I took a step back from teaching. So I taught 1 more year, and then I ended up taking a leave of absence for a year, just to kind of like see how that affected my mental health, really. If I wasn't trying to juggle like 2 full-time jobs. And then I just got like super lucky that I was able to take a full year off and then extend my leave of absence. And then I finally had to decide to quit teaching for the time being and focus on this.
Is there anything in particular from teaching that you really miss? I know the time commitment is real. I can't speak for Laura, but like I went into English for my undergrad with the intention of teaching. And then I realized how many essays I would have to mark and made a career change. But
yeah, I mean, I don't blame you. It's intense.
It's a lot of work. And so is there anything that you like really miss from that environment?
So the truth is I don't miss teaching that much. And I feel really guilty saying that because I loved my job. I loved being a teacher. I love my students, like obviously like working with teenagers. I taught freshmen and seniors. So I got to teach like this kind of really cool split between like when they're freshmen and they're like 14, they're still sort of like golden retriever puppies. And then getting to teach seniors who are more jaded, but also you can almost kind of talk to like full adults. And so I loved that. I loved the work that I did, but I expected to miss it a lot more when I stepped back. And what I realized is that, yeah, I worked way too much. And I've spent a lot of time in therapy, kind of unpacking that part of my life where I was only focused on work, whereas writing full time has allowed me to have a lot more balance in my life. And so sometimes it's hard to miss teaching.
I think that makes total sense. Has your writing process changed a lot going from writing part-time and teaching to writing full-time?
Yeah. And somehow it's gotten like worse. I can't explain it. It makes no sense. And I think, honestly, I think that's just kind of the nature of, when I was writing as a teacher, I was writing for myself. I wasn't writing for like anyone else. I didn't have like a readership in mind. I wasn't thinking about, reviews or Instagram posts, like, or an editor or anyone else. And so it was a lot, I want to say easier to write then because the only person I was trying to entertain was me. And I'm easily entertained by myself. I think I'm hilarious. So it was all great, when I was doing that, even if it wasn't excellent for my mental health in terms of like, all I was doing was working. Whereas once I started writing full time, I was also writing, under contract or writing, with this audience in mind of people who either, liked my first book or didn't and thinking about them. And so I think in that sense, the writing has become, I would say just like mostly slower. It's not just that it's harder. It's more that like the process, it just takes more time and it takes more like unpacking of some of those, inner critic voices.
I kind of want to touch on the writing with an audience in mind. And I'm wondering if that brings a different level of pressure, not just writing with like the critical audience in mind, but also, or in mind, but also representing the queer community in your books. Does that ever bring an added pressure to your writing or?
Totally. And it's something like I've had to, again, like, thank goodness for therapy, but I've had to work pretty hard to try to overcome that. But I think, yeah, once you kind of know, and I think with my debut, with the Charm Offensive, I knew exactly what people liked about it because they told me, right? And they would like come into my DMs and they'd be like, this is what I liked. This is what I connected to. And so as I was drafting my second book, I was like, oh my gosh, like it doesn't have that thing that they really liked. What if therefore they don't like this one? And so I think, yeah, kind of overcoming that and learning how to like take that and kind of like put it in a little basket and put it aside when you're drafting. Because I think ultimately going back to kind of that pre-publishing writing of like writing to entertain yourself, like writing to please yourself, like writing something that you're proud of, people respond to that a lot more than you trying to write what you think maybe they want to read, or like trying to guess your audience or trying to speak for every queer experience, which is impossible, right? So I think that's kind of what I try to do, mostly successfully sometimes.
Mostly successfully sometimes. I like that phrasing.
Yeah.
But kind of speaking of, at least in my experience, a somewhat universal queer experience, it's being very attached to your high school English teacher. Teachers in general, but especially high school English teachers, to the point where you dedicated half of the dedication for Here We Go Again is to the queer students who were low-key obsessed to with their high school English teachers. And I was just curious why you think that is.
I wish I knew, but I think, unfortunately in public education, especially in most mainstream public education, there aren't a lot of classes where you like talk about feelings. And I think English is one of those classes that lends itself to that, to self-reflection, to journaling, to like reading about characters and connecting with them in some capacity, and I think that really lends itself to forming a deep bond between the teacher and student, like in a, professional, like appropriate way. But yeah, every time I see memes about like queer kids and their teachers, I'm like, oh my gosh, yes. Both from like a student perspective and from, that teacher perspective of just the connections with students who really most need to be seen and validated in high school. And English teachers are often there to provide that, as are other teachers in other subjects. But
yeah, I won't lie. When I opened Here We Go Again, which I want to get to next, but I took a photo of that dedication for my Instagram only to remember that my high school English teachers follow me on Instagram. So they all saw it.
Yes.
So yeah, you're definitely reaching your target audience. But let's
perfect.
Let's talk about the book. Can you tell us about it, what it's about, etc.?
Yeah, I pitched this book originally to my agent as just my sapphic road trip rom-com about death. And so that's typically how I kind of sum it up. So it is about two women who were childhood best friends in this very small town and then kind of drifted apart and eventually became pretty contentious in their relationship. And they are, as adults, kind of thrown back together when their former high school English teacher and mentor asks them to drive him from Washington State to Maine. And then, of course, zaniness ensues.
All the zaniness in a really great, funny way. Where did the idea for the road trip or the road trip about death come from?
So kind of a couple different places. I had these two characters. So the characters are Rosemary and Logan. And I knew I wanted to write a book about them. They kind of came to me first for this one. And I kept putting them in different scenarios. And then just feeling like it wasn't quite right and it wasn't quite working. And then unfortunately, one of my best friends, her mom had a pretty severe relapse in her cancer. And she was down in Ocean Springs, Mississippi, which is a location that the book spends a lot of time in. And she was taking care of her mom. And at one point she was talking to me about having to medically transport her mom to where she lives in Massachusetts. And we were just texting about this idea of having to how do you do that? How do you medically transport someone in this situation? And my friend Meredith, who I adore, always finds the comedy in everything, right? So even in the most tragic situations, she can laugh. And so she was, sending me these texts about it. And that just really stuck out to me as an idea of what would you do if you had to drive across the country with someone who was dying. And that felt like the right story to try to put these characters in. And so I pitched that to my agent, thinking also a rom-com about death. I was like, oh no, they're probably not going to go for this. And she emailed me back and was like, I love it. Yes, let's do it. Let's write about death in this comedy. And then unfortunately, my friend's mom, her situation worsened quite a bit. And I ended up flying to Ocean Springs to help with caretaking shortly before she passed away. And so a lot of the book kind of draws upon some of those really difficult experiences that I had, with my friend and with the loss of her mom.
What was that writing experience like then? Because it sounds like you said, you drew on your own personal experience. Was it really emotional and cathartic?
Yeah, for sure. And it was hard because it was both my story and not my story, because it was something that I experienced. And most of my experience was on the other end of it. So this book centers on, he is dying, but he is still very much alive. And they're having these experiences with him as they drive across the country, getting off track, doing all these different things. Whereas, in my experiences were more focused on after her mother passed and kind of how we navigated that together. And I think it was really emotionally challenging. That was a very hard time in my life. And it wasn't even primarily happening to me. It was, obviously for my friend, so much harder. And so it was really cathartic to write about it. It was nice to take moments of humor that we had and like put them into the book. Because again, my friend, she just like is so good at finding the humor in like the most tragic situations. And that is how she kind of sees the world. And so a lot of jokes were things that came from her, and things that like really happened to us. And then I think it was also just kind of scary. Like having her read it was really scary because it's not the story of her mom, like, but it has those moments, especially during scenes that take place in Ocean Springs. And so making sure that I don't know, honored her mom and her experience and didn't, I don't want to say exploit it, because obviously we had tons of conversations like about me writing this book, but yeah, to kind of dishonor it.
And not to get too existential at 9:19
Yeah.
on a Wednesday morning, but did this change your perspective on just loss and death in general, writing this book? Because it is an emotional journey for the reader as well.
I don't know if it changed my perspective. And I think I talk about this in the acknowledgments of the book, but like I didn't have very many experiences with death before I like sat down to like when I pitched this book to my agent and I was like, oh yeah, no, it'll be based on this like medical transport thing. I wanted to write about loss, but I hadn't experienced very much of it myself. And then in the next year and a half following that, I experienced a lot of loss. And, we lost my friend's mom, and then I lost both of my maternal grandparents, who I was incredibly close with. And so I think it didn't so much change my perspective as allow me a space to crystallize what that perspective is and to kind of reflect on caretaking, on grief, especially on grief before you have lost the person, right? Which I think can be a really complicated thing when someone is dying, as this was the case with both of my grandparents, and having that experience.
I think you do a really good job in the book of kind of taking the reader through that journey, but also balancing it with, like you said, those bits of humor as well. A lot of that humor comes from Logan and Rosie, who are two dual point of view narrators, who are both great narrators in different ways and have totally different personalities. Why did you decide to kind of choose to do both of them narrating the story? And do any of their personalities kind of come from you at all, or is it kind of their own person?
Yeah, no, I'm a straight up narcissist. So all of my characters definitely are like partially me, at least a little bit. I would say that Logan and Rosemary, of the characters I've written so far, are the least like me. But what was really interesting is when I first had some very close people in my life read it, they were all like, oh my gosh, there's so much of you in this book. Like you put so much of yourself in this one. And I was like, really? I felt like I was kind of a little bit more aloof, but psych. No, I wasn't. I'm always just writing through my own stuff. And so with both of the characters, they have a lot of pieces of me. But I decided to write it in dual POV, honestly, because again, I started with these two characters, like I had their voices and kind of their dynamic in my head first, and I kept putting them in different situations and trying to start this book. And it was kind of just always in dual POV because I felt like it was a book where we benefit from seeing how they view each other at various times. And we understand I think we understand kind of the characters better through seeing how they interact with outside people. And so, plus it just was more fun. Like, I think there's certain things with, they're a bit antagonistic as characters, and that's just more fun to write in dual POV.
Did you find one voice came to you easier or was more fun to write? Or was it they were both pretty crystal clear in your head?
They felt crystal clear initially. And then like, as I wrote this book and rewrote it a million times, they changed so much. And I realized I knew nothing about them and had to really dig into them as people. I think they were both Like Logan was more fun to write. She is like snarkier and like, just has I don't know, a personality that is enjoyable to see the world through her eyes. But she was also harder to write because I think finding a balance between that snarkiness and then also her heart and like, not just having her be this, I don't know, walking like joke machine, like having her be someone who has depth and who we understand why she ultimately loves Rosemary. I think that was a lot harder from her POV. Whereas Rosemary is like very similar to, I think, characters that I have in all of my books, right? She's got anxiety, she's got ADHD, she's intense, and that's a lot more like me. So that's a lot easier to write.
And you mentioned a few times about the humor of the book. Like it is ultimately a rom-com about death. Did you ever find yourself leaning too much in one direction, either too much in the light and funny or too much in the death and emotion of it all?
I don't honestly, like time will tell as readers get back to me on that one, I feel like, because you read the book so many times. But for me, there was always kind of this, like it was all mostly fun and games. And then, they get to Ocean Springs and the last like 100 pages of the book, I would always just be like, oh my God, no one's going to put up with this. This is a slog. Like, this is so like, sad and depressing. And so I think that was something I had a lot of concern about at the end of the book, not having enough humor to kind of balance the heavier stuff, especially, in terms of feeling like a really abrupt shift between like these ridiculous scenarios and like dog hijinks and, all of these things that happen versus, the end where things get a lot more serious. And so, yeah, I don't know. Time will tell how other people react to that. But for me, yeah, I always was kind of, I think that was not even a fear, but just something I was always really aware of. It's like, okay, got to add some moments of levity to the end of this book. Otherwise, it is very little rom and no com. So
speaking from mine and Rachel's text messages, last night we were talking about how we were bawling at the end of the book, but we were also talking about different jokes throughout. So I think you did a good job kind of balancing everything. One of the jokes that we loved was all the references to kind of like queer icons / celebrities like Megan Rapinoe. We also love the Shay Mitchell references as well. So
thank you. Great for defending the Shay Mitchell references. I had one of my like close writing friends is Timothy Janofsky, and like I love all of his books, but we're like exactly 10 years apart. So he is still like, he's like 26. And when he read the book the first time, he was like, I don't know about these Shay Mitchell references. They seem like not topical. Like Pretty Little Liars was a long time ago. And I was like, okay, Tim, listen, like Shay Mitchell's entire Instagram is like such a thirst trap for lesbians. Like, I don't know. I just like, she's so beautiful. And like, she's always trying to sell me luggage and like, yeah, I'll buy it. Like she's gorgeous.
Well, and Emily Fields is a queer icon. Like
exactly. Yes.
Did you have like a running list of names that you wanted to include in the book? Or was it just like you were writing like, oh, Phoebe Bridgers will work here?
It was totally, yeah. I was like, who have I not done yet? And then I had to like go through and be like, oh my gosh, I've already used this person. I got to say, or like I had to move them around for Logan's swearing on various queer icons.
Oh, we loved it.
Oh, thank you.
Going back to Logan and Rosie for a second. So both girls have very different coming out experiences and both present differently. So Logan is masc while Rosie is very femme. So did you always see the characters this way? And what do you think the contrast kind of brings to their growth throughout the book?
Oh, that's a really good question. I mean, I think, so when I pictured stylistically, like Rosemary always had sort of this like Rory Gilmore, like Paris Geller, like kind of vibe of like very preppy in how she dressed and like, and very kind of always in professional mode, right? Because that is part of kind of how she protects herself, is this like constant putting on of, being put together. And so I always kind of knew that that was what she looked like, maybe some like old school, like Blair in Gossip Girl vibes. Whereas when I pictured how Logan dressed, it was very much like Finley from Generation Q. It was just like, I loved the like Hawaiian shirts or like the tropical shirts, like a backwards baseball cap, this kind of like, I don't care like what I look like. I'm just like rolling, out the door every day. And yet you're like, dang, that aesthetic looks very put together. It's like it's so casual that it's flawless. And that was kind of just how I pictured her. And I think in both cases, the way that they dress is indicative of their personalities, right? And how they approach the world. And Logan, like, just wants to be apathetic, like wants to not care and not let anything hurt her. And that is how she is moving through the world. And for Rosemary, I think the way that she presents in terms of her attire, like slightly changes over the course of the story, or at least is discussed more in her transformation. Whereas like Logan's is not, like she just is like always going to dress like in basketball shorts for like formal occasions, right? Like that's just her vibe. So yeah. So I think we don't see that in the same way with Logan, even as she starts caring or letting herself acknowledge and show that she cares.
First, I just want to say excellent call out to Finley. What a great mess of a character.
And such like those the fashion vibes. I was just like, yes, this is right. This is exactly what I want to channel for this character.
And honestly, goals sometimes. Like she rocks a Hawaiian shirt like no other.
I wish I could pull that off. Like seriously. Yeah.
Same. My Hawaiian shirt collection is growing, but it's nowhere near as extensive.
No.
But kind of along the same lines about the difference between Rosemary and Logan, you also kind of go through or touch on different eras of queerness between Rosemary and Logan's experience versus Joe. And I was kind of curious what that experience was like writing Joe and his history as somebody who grew up without any queer mentors and lived through the AIDS crisis.
I mean, I think like anything, I'm obviously far more equipped to speak to the experiences of Rosemary and Logan, even though they both, figure out their sexuality and like come out in high school, which is like not my experience. I didn't come out until I was 33. And so very different in that sense. But the way that they kind of view queerness is more like aligned with my own experiences. Whereas, for Joe, I wanted to kind of highlight some of those differences, especially in regards to like Logan's kind of has this attitude of like, she's very privileged, right? Like she can like roll up in a small Southern town, like in this van that has like gay paraphernalia on it. And she's like, it's fine. Like I'm me. But like, she's also, white. And like, she has a lot of privilege in how like people are going to interact with her. Whereas Joe doesn't have those same experiences of like default safety. And yet he is also able to be like, I don't know if optimistic is the right word, but he still tries to see the best in everyone and how he interacts with people throughout the trip. And most of the trip takes place in locations that are not known for being particularly queer friendly.
Speaking of the locations of the road trip, is this something that you kind of tested yourself? Like, did you do the route yourself to figure out the different locations?
I did, but not sort of in a weird way. So, I spent a lot of time in Ocean Springs, Mississippi a couple years ago when my friend, her mom passed away. And so I was there, packing up the house. And eventually my sister also flew out to help us like finish packing up the house because it had been just the two of us. And so my sister came and we kind of finished it up. And then my sister and I drove from Ocean Springs, Mississippi, to where we live, which is just outside of Portland, Oregon, but on the Washington side. And so we did that drive, and it was instead what I did was I just wherever we went had to be a location in the book. So I had to kind of shoehorn the book into being like, yes, and then this will be their journey, which was ridiculous because we drove through the South and like the Southwest in that road trip. And I had decided they were going to Maine. So, it could have just like said they were going to like Georgia or Florida or something. But I was like, no, I'm going to say that they're going from Washington to Maine. And then I'm going to have the whole trip take place like in the Southern United States, just cause. So that is kind of how I ended up choosing a lot of the locations, was just based on where we went on that trip.
And as far as road trip rules go, are you passenger is DJ or driver picks the music? Very important question.
Ooh, it is a very important question. I feel like I'm actually more like diplomatic in terms of like, sure, in the beginning, like the driver picks the music. And in any situation where everyone is exhausted and the driver needs to stay awake, driver picks the music. But otherwise, it's more of like a general vibe rotation, like let's see how everyone's feeling and then let the person pick. But yeah, like in any late night, we had to drive to Palm Springs from Portland a couple years ago. And like, it was we did it in like one shot, which it's like a 20-hour drive. And we were trying to do it pretty fast. And so it was like the last 2 hours was the middle of the night. And I was driving and I was like, absolutely, like, it's my choice. Like, we are going to listen to Reputation because that is going to get me pumped. Like, that has a good like beat for driving 80 at like 2 a.m. and like staying focused. So yeah, any late night driving, always driver's choice.
And phenomenal choice. I mean, I'm a Reputation girly myself, so
it really, like, when you need to like kind of be like, whoo, I always recommend it. Like that was I should have put words to that. This is a podcast. But like when you really need like a little bit of pep in your step, when you need a little bit of energy, I feel like Reputation just has the rise you need, especially in the beginning, to like get you going.
And do you also listen to Jane Austen audiobooks while driving, or is that a Rosemary only trait?
Yeah, I like to listen to audiobooks while I drive, but generally not Jane Austen. But that's also because I've like read all of Jane Austen like in a pre-audiobook obsession time of my life. I am a huge Jane Austen fan, but no, I don't typically. I think honestly, the vibes of a Jane Austen audiobook might be hard for driving like really long distances.
I would have to agree. One thing I kind of want to circle back to is that you mentioned a few times that you wanted to write a book about like death, like the lesbian road trip book about death. But I'm kind of curious what drew you to this idea of loss, because like, I don't know, the story is very, very queer. Like it's a queer story, but like loss is something that transcends everything. And the characters are so scared of loss in general and not just death. And so I'm kind of curious what drew you to this theme.
Yeah, great question. Because I think it just is one of those things that was not a conscious choice. I mean, the writing about death was a conscious choice, right? And being like, okay, these characters are going to be forced together because of their, deep bond with their English teacher, who was really instrumental in both of them coming to accept themselves, like in their queerness, but also like their neurodivergence and their mental health and all these different aspects. And so that was intentional. But I think a lot of the ways that the other kinds of loss that came up, like the loss of their friendship, right, or the loss of dreams or things that they have given up on, was more just organic in terms of like, as I was writing the story, it's what felt just right for the characters and kind of right for the journey that they were on. And I did really like the idea of paralleling like the grief that they have over losing Joe, especially the pre-grief when they have not lost him yet, with the loss of a really close friendship that they had as younger girls. Because I think losing a friend in that capacity, though not the same at all as losing someone to cancer, can be really difficult and really emotionally impactful.
And I also feel like, going back to the queer experience, that that is something that happens with a lot of queer folks, is the loss of an important friendship early on in life.
Yeah.
And how did you keep your spirits lighter when writing the back half of this book?
I don't know if I did. Like, I would make myself cry every time, which I was like, that's probably not good. That's probably not a good sign. And, and part of it was like the way that I drew upon my own experiences and like, where the attachments I had to the characters and the grief at the end and the people who I'd lost in my life. But yeah, I don't know. I think that really, like, I would sometimes put on Van Morrison too, and I would just be like, yep, I'm gonna cry now. It's fine. I'll just like sit here crying. I wrote a lot of this book in early pregnancy. And so, or like did a lot of revisions on it in early pregnancy when I was just like crying all the time anyway. So I was like, it's fine. But yeah, so I think I indulged the sadness a little bit with this one.
Is Van Morrison your like go-to crying music?
Van Morrison is like my dad when we were I don't know, Van Morrison is dad music. So like when we were kids, my dad would always put on Van Morrison in the car and like we would listen to Van. And so I just grew up with a lot of those songs and they like really deeply remind me of my dad. And I think that's the kind of connection that like Logan and Rosemary both have to Joe. And so I chose him as an artist for that reason, but also because he just has like so many songs that will like gut you, right? Like I just and also so many like fun songs and like upbeat songs, but like sometimes Van Morrison is like, yeah, what you need. You just need to like listen to his amazing voice and cry.
Now, here's where we ask for your recommendations. Do you have any other queer romance books you would recommend to our listeners?
Oh my gosh, so many. So that, yes, is the answer. I feel like also 2024 is going to be an amazing year for sapphic books. There are so many sapphic books coming out that I am really excited about. Some of my favorite authors, like I am a huge fan of Anita Kelly and all of their work. And they have a sapphic book coming out early this year called How You Get the Girl, so Taylor Swift reference. And then Maisie Eddings also has a sapphic book coming out called Late Bloomer that has like the most gorgeous cover you've ever seen. And I had the privilege of reading that one early. So I loved that. And then I'm super excited and where did it just left my brain. Chintzia C. Higgins has a book coming out. I think it's called A Little Kissing Between Friends. But if I said that wrong, I'm so sorry. It could just be kissing between friends. But I loved Chintzia's like first sapphic romance. And so I'm super excited about this one. There's also, I think the author is Carmen Lee, and it's a book called The 710 Split. I think it's coming out from like Harlequin's new line. And it is about teachers as well who have to like coach a bowling team together. Which honestly, like that book was written just for me. Like that sounds like something I will just like gobble up. So I'm so excited for that one. Oh gosh, other sapphic books. I think Ashley Herring Blake, her series of, Delilah Green Doesn't Care. And all of those books are some of my favorites. And I think she has like a holiday romance coming out this year. Like, I don't think it has like a cover yet. So like, we don't have all the details, but I'm pretty sure that has been announced. And hopefully it's been announced. I'm super excited about that one. I'm trying to think. Oh, Amy Spalding also has one coming out called At Her Service. So it's the second one. Her first book was For Her Consideration. They're like Hollywood sapphic romances. And I had the honor to read that one early as well. And it's fantastic. And then I don't know if I can recommend it yet because it came out yesterday and I haven't read it. But there's that Bridgerton meets like Parent Trap sapphic book coming out. Also a Taylor Swift song. It's called Don't Want You Like a Best Friend. I know. And so I haven't read it yet. I've heard great things and I'm super pumped. So hopefully we can all read that one together and talk about it because I'm excited.
Well, we'll include links to all of those in our show notes.
That was a lot. Sorry.
No. I was just going to say thank you for giving me my 2024 TBR because I literally just wrote all of those down and will be pre-ordering them. So thank you personally for that.
Yes, of course.
And I haven't read any of the ones that haven't come out yet, but the Ashley Herring Blake ones are so good.
They're so good. I love her as a writer. And every time I get to like meet her in person, I feel like I'm like so intimidated and I'm like, oh my God, you're so incredible. But like, obviously she's just a normal person, like her writer, but she is like God tier to me because she writes incredible sapphic books.
Do you have any other writing heroes or authors you kind of draw inspiration from?
Great question. I feel like one of the cool things about romance is that it's always in conversation with itself, if that makes sense. And so there are a lot of contemporary writers where I really respect kind of what they're doing. Like Maisie Eddings, for example, always writes about neurodivergent characters. And I think does it in a really beautiful way. And so she is someone who I'm inspired to, when I am writing about neurodivergent characters, like use the care that she does. And then of course there are also just some romance writers that are like so good at their craft. Like I'm listening to a Kennedy Ryan book right now and like, holy cow, Kennedy Ryan, like it's so beautiful. And so there are definitely writers like that. And like, again, I like have seen Kennedy Ryan from like across a room and like, no, I have not introduced myself because I'm like, oh no, you're like, I can't, I'm beneath you. You are amazing.
Well, it's nice to know that, authors fangirl too. That always makes us feel better.
Oh yeah. If I ever met like Casey McQuiston, I met Casey McQuiston before I became an author and it was very embarrassing. Like it was back in like 2019 and I did not put my best foot forward because I was like in awe. But yeah, there are a couple of authors like if I ever met them, if I ever met Alice Oseman in person, I would be like not cool about it.
I have faith that you'd be cool. You'll be fine.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for that.
I got you. Yeah.
Misplaced faith, but thank you.
Well, I know that we have kept you for almost an hour. So before we let you go on with your Wednesday morning, what do you have coming up next? Any ideas percolating? Are you drafting anything new?
Yeah, I'm currently drafting my fourth book, which I can't say anything about, mostly because like my books tend to change a lot as I'm drafting them. So anything I said about it at this point would probably not be true a year from now. But I am in the process of drafting book 4. Yeah. And then I am due to have my first little baby in just a couple weeks. And so that will, I think, interrupt my drafting a little bit. And we'll see how it goes mixing full-time writer life with full-time mommy life.
Congratulations. That's so exciting.
Thank you. Yeah. My wife and I are like so excited. It's getting to the end and we're like, yes, let's meet him. Let's do it.
Where can listeners find you online?
Ooh, best place is Instagram. Cause I think I'm like on TikTok, but like, no, I'm not. I'm too old for that. So Instagram is the best place to find me in general. You can also find information about my books on my website, which is just my name, AlisonCochrun.com. I think those are probably your best bets.
Amazing. Well, Alison, thank you so much for taking time today to come chat with us. Really appreciate it.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Thank you so much for all your questions. And thank you for reading Here We Go Again. It's still so early in the process. I've talked to so few people who've read it. So thank you.
Thank you. This is great. And we can't wait for more people to read it so we can talk to everyone about it.
Yes.
Thank you for listening to the Kobo Writing Life podcast. If you're interested in picking up Alison's books, we will include links in our show notes. And if you are enjoying this podcast, please be sure to rate, review, and subscribe, and tell your friends. And if you're looking for more tips on growing your self-publishing business, you can find us at KoboWritingLife.com and be sure to follow us on socials. We are at Kobo Writing Life on Facebook and Twitter and at kobo.writing.life on Instagram.
This episode was hosted by Laura Granger and Rachel Wharton with production by Terrence Abrahams. Editing is provided by Kelly Robotham. Our theme music is composed by Tearjerker, and thanks to Alison Cochrun for being a guest. If you're ready to start your publishing journey, sign up today at kobo.com/writinglife. Until next time, happy writing!